Well, good evening, everyone. It's 5:30, and so we'll make a start. Welcome to today's planning meeting of the 18th of August 2025. Love to welcome the members of the public, councillors and officers to this meeting. I'm going to call now upon the clerk who will advise us how the meeting will run this afternoon. Thank you.
Please note that we are live streaming this meeting via the Council's YouTube channel to encourage more people to engage in our public meetings. The proceedings of the meeting will also be recorded. Please can I remind everyone to use their microphones when speaking and turn them off when finished. Please can attendees in person refrain from watching the live stream because this will cause interference for our viewers. Please also ensure that your mobile phones and iPads are turned to silent. We are not expecting any fire alarm testing today. In the event of an evacuation, please leave by the nearest exit and gather in the car park next to the library opposite Tesco. Should members of the public need to use the facilities, they are located through the doors to the right of the security guard. In accordance with the Constitution, members of the public who have registered to speak will be permitted to do so when invited by the chair. I have confirmed those entitled to speak. Please note that registered speakers are not permitted to approach committee members or distribute documentation to the committee during the course of this meeting. The application will be dealt with in the following order. The planning officer will present the submitted application and will outline the proposed recommendation in full. Any speakers registered to speak on the application will be invited to address the committee. This will be taken in the following order. Speakers against, Neighbourhood Forum representatives, any councillors who are not members of the committee, followed by speakers in support of the application. All speakers will have a maximum of 5 minutes each to address the meeting. This will be followed by questions from members and responses from the planning officer. Once questions from the committee have concluded, the chair will open the application for debate. At the conclusion of the debate, the chair will seek a proposer and a seconder for the application. The proposal must be in full and include all information such as conditions or reasons. The chair will then confirm with the planning officer if they wish to enter into a period of summing up. Members, if at any point you leave the meeting for any reason during the consideration of the application, you will be unable to vote on that application. I will now hand the chairing of the meeting to the chair, Councillor Brooke.
Thank you, Lorraine. Lorraine, are there any apologies or updates to the membership of the committee, please?
Yep, we have apologies have been received from Councillor Strang, who is being represented by Councillor Bye.
Thank you, and welcome, Councillor Bye. Minutes. Just to confirm correct record of the minutes of our meeting held on the 23rd of June 2025, can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Tolshard, seconder, Councillor Pentney. All those in favour?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Moving on now to declarations of interest. Do any of the members of the planning committee here have any pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests on the item on the agenda today? If you have, please raise your hand. Thank you. Similar question to the officers. Do you have any pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests on the item on today's agenda? Thank you. Lorraine, do we have any urgent items?
No, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to just sign the minutes. Okay. Excellent. So we'll move now to today's item, item 5. This is to consider an application of land adjacent to our county court on Nicholson Road, Torquay, and its planning references P/2024/0511. The clerk has confirmed those who have registered to speak upon entry. I will therefore ask Verity Clark to introduce the application. Thank you, Ms. Clark.
Thank you. So the application site is comprised of an access road with a safety barrier and an area of grassland surrounded by trees and vegetation, access from Nicholson Road and adjacent to Riviera Way. The application site is approximately 0.66 hectares in area. So the highest part of the site is at the point of access from Nicholson Road, and it slopes towards the south where it sits adjacent to the main highway route of Riviera Way. The site is located within the Riviera Way Corridor Urban Landscape Protection Area and is designated as local green space within the Torquay Neighbourhood Plan. To the southwest of the site is an area of mature woodland which has the benefit of a tree protection order, and this lies along the southern boundary between the Riviera Way highway and the application site. So the site's located in flood zone 1 and a critical drainage area as designated by the Environment Agency. So this is an aerial photo of the site. To the north of the site is Nicholson Road, and we've got the County Court building and the car park, which is accessed off the same private access road. So if I just show you here now, we've got Nicholson Road, this is the County Court building with the car park, and this is the area of private access, which will lead down into the site. So along Nicholson Road, there are a number of commercial buildings, including a nursery, accountants, and other offices. So to the south and southwest of the site is Riviera Way, which is bounded by TPO protected trees, and we've got the adjacent Benson's for Bed building. So this is Benson's for Beds, which was formerly Carpetright. So this plan shows the existing site layout. So the site is located north of Riviera Way, and site vegetation clearance works have previously been undertaken, which has opened up views into the site. So this plan shows the existing site sections. From it you can really see that the site slopes from north to south with a fair change in levels. So the plan now showing is the proposed site layout plan. So the proposal seeks outline planning permission with matters of appearance and landscaping reserved for use classes B2, B8, EGII and EGIII, commercial units with the associated works. The applicant proposes a 25% split between the 4 proposed uses, which could be controlled by condition. So the proposal features 2 blocks of development. The northern block features 8 units and cycle storage with a floor area of 800 metres squared, and the southern block will feature 9 units with a floor area of 1,244 metres squared. The site will be accessed by the existing shared surface access road that leads to the County Court, and this will be extended down into the site. The site will feature 60 parking spaces sited centrally between the buildings and to the sides. There will also be space for commercial vehicle turning area. Pedestrian footpaths will be created next to the buildings alongside markings on the car park for designated footpath routes. A new access to Nicholson Road will be formed via a stepped pedestrian access which links to internal footpaths. You can just see on the plan here, this is the location of the new stepped access which links up to Nicholson Road. So this plan details the proposed elevations in terms of scale but not appearance, as this is a reserved matter. So the northern block will feature a pitched roof and will have a total height of 8.9 metres set within a staggered building line. The southern block also includes a staggered building line and pitched roof. Given the slope of the ground levels, this building will require underbuild on the rear southern elevation, which varies in height. At its tallest point, including underbuild, the building will have an approximate height of 13.8 metres, although when viewed from within the central yard area, the height will be 9.25 metres. The existing site topographical survey indicates that the junction of the shared access road with Nicholson Road has a level of 66.470, and the southern block will have a roof level of 69.350, so that will sit 2.88 metres higher than this section of the road. So the overall height will therefore likely sit below that of the adjacent county court. So to facilitate the construction, excavation and build-up will be required across the site. So this next plan details the proposed sections through the site. It demonstrates the level of build-up and excavation required to facilitate the proposal. Section B, so this one, shows the site from north to south, and gives a good idea of the gradient and build-up and excavation required. So this last plan details the proposed stepped access, which is proposed to link Nicholson Road to the site. So this is a Google Street View image from Nicholson Road, showing the private access road shared with the county court on the left and the northern boundary to the site. And then you've got on-street parking along Nicholson Road. So this is a photograph taken from Nicholson Road, showing the northern boundary and then the start of the shared access road. So this image is taken standing on the shared access road with the car park to the county court on the left and the access which will be extended down into the site on the right of the image. This is another image standing at the top of the site from the shared access road, looking down towards the Bensons for Bed building with Riviera Way in the background. So this is Bensons for Beds, or the former Carpet Right. And then you can just about make out you've got Riviera Way highway just in the distance. And you've got the line of TPO protected trees here. You can see as well from that photo really how the ground level slopes down to the south of the site. And then lastly, this image is taken from Riviera Way looking up to the sites. We've got Bensons for Beds on the right, and you can see the TPO protected trees bounding Riviera Way just along here. But you can see from this photo that the site is visible in the gap, and one of the commercial buildings on Nicholson Road is visible in the distance, which you can just about see there. So this slide lists the key material considerations, which are considered in detail in the committee report, which I'm going to briefly run through now. So in terms of the principle of development, the site is located in a designated local green space under policy TE2 of the neighbourhood plan. Policy TE2 states that development is ruled out other than in very special circumstances. The policy goes on to outline a number of very special circumstances. However, the proposal would fall outside of those specified. Paragraph 108 of the MPPF states that policies for managing development within a local green space should be consistent with national policy for green belts. Footnote 45 clarifies that this excludes the provisions relating to grey belt and previously developed land. Paragraph 153 of the MPPF states that when considering any planning application, local planning authorities should ensure that substantial weight is given to any harm to the green belt, including harm to its openness. Inappropriate development is, by definition, harmful to the green belt and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. Very special circumstances will not exist unless a potential harm to the green belt by reason of its inappropriateness and any other harm resulting from the proposal is clearly outweighed by other considerations. And paragraph 154 of the MPPF states that development in the green belt is inappropriate unless one of the listed exceptions applies. But the proposal does not fall within any of those listed exceptions. So there is a very pressing need to improve economic performance, which is key to reducing income and employment deprivation in Torbay. The proposal will help to deliver the Torbay economic growth strategy. The application is supported by an economic benefits summary statement, which draws on the evidence base for the economic growth strategy. The new economic development needs assessment is currently under preparation, but the draft report indicates a likely need for at least 14 hectares of Class EG and B2 land by 2040. There is a shortage of well-accessed employment land with good transport connections and a risk that employers will relocate out of Torbay if sufficient space cannot be provided. The principle of new employment space is supported by policy TJ1 of the neighbourhood plan, which states that the provision of new employment space will be supported across Torquay, consistent with policies for managing development constrained within the Torquay neighbourhood plan and the Torbay local plan. In terms of the local plan's growth strategy, there is a need to boost economic development in order to meet the target of 5,000 to 5,500 new jobs. Policy SS4 is clear that the Council will, in principle, support proposals that deliver employment space and high-value jobs. Although not specifically allocated for employment in the Torbay local plan, the site is within the broader Torquay Gateway area and is an accessible location close to strategic transport networks. As an update to the committee report, the Council's Principal Policy and Project Planner has asked me to provide an update on the local plan's working party's deliberations relating to employment land. The local plan working party, held on the 26th of June, considered the allocation of employment sites in light of the final economic development needs assessment data. The working party considered that the forthcoming draft local plan should seek to allocate between 20 hectares and 28 hectares of employment land, which is an increase from the circa 14 hectares allocated in the current local plan. The land adjacent to the county court was identified as a site for allocation in the draft local plan, and it is intended to be published for public consultation in autumn. This carries very little weight in the planning balance at present, since it's only a working party recommendation. However, the Planning Committee should be aware that the working party has agreed to consult on the principle of developing the site in the local plan. The Economic Benefits Policy and Demand Summary Statement prepared by the applicant states that there is an identified demand for 2,128 square metres of employment space, and in accordance with the latest analysis of the need assessment, there is clear evidence that there is a deficit of employment land supply of 1.4 hectares. There is also evidence that there is an imbalance of distribution for delivery of employment space, with 95% currently being in Paynton and only 5% in Torquay. This same report also identifies an increasing net loss of employment allocated space to alternative uses. So the construction of the proposed development will generate initial temporary direct benefits for employment and indirect benefits through supply chain spending, but its positive impacts will be experienced for long afterwards and will provide an important source of local economic and social benefits for communities. The operation of the commercial floor space will support a range of employment opportunities on site, with this employment contributing to uplifts in economic productivity across both Torbay and sub-regional economies. Section 5 and 6 of the report identifies construction phase and operational phase impacts, including that the operation of the proposed development has the capacity to support circa 16 FTE jobs on site. The proposed development will generate economic productivity in the form of GVA uplift annually, and there is the potential to deliver an annual net additional 1 million GVA contribution to Torbay's economy each year, with this being part of a wider 1.5 million contribution generated across the sub-regional area. So overall, the economic benefits generated from the proposed development weigh very strongly in favour of the proposal. So moving on then, in terms of design and visual appearance, the site is located within an area designated as an ULPA. So in terms then of the landscape impact, it's relevant to consider the visibility of the site from Riviera Way and other public vantage points. So the applicants provided a landscape and visual amenity statement, and the report confirms that only 2 partial views of the site were identified from points in close proximity of the site, and that was on Nicholson Road and then a slip road exiting Riviera Way. So there is scope for introducing planting to the east of the site, which would assist with filtering and screening the site from the slip road. And overall, the report concludes that with appropriate mitigation measures, the development could be accommodated within the landscape. So the review of the urban landscape protection areas in Torbay describes the designation as a gateway to Torbay, heavily treed valley floor, particularly along the railway line, with road boundaries and hospital approaches, and it contributes to a network of linear linkages throughout the urban area and acts as a green corridor for wildlife. Whilst the proposal will result in the loss of the open space, the key positive aspect of the tree-lined corridor facing Riviera Way will be retained, and there is scope for appropriate mitigation to screen the site further and bolster current landscaping. Whilst the proposal will alter the character of the ULPA, the intrinsic value for which it was designated can be retained and enhanced, and therefore the proposal is considered to be in accordance with Policy C5 of the local plan, subject to securing an adequate landscaping scheme at the reserved matters stage. Policy TE2 of the neighbourhood plan designates the site as the Riviera Way Woodland Local Green Space. So whilst the name indicates that the designation relates to woodland, the whole site is covered by this designation and therefore must be treated as a local green space. So paragraph 153 of the MPPF states that when considering any planning application, local planning authorities should ensure that substantial weight is given to any harm to the green belt, including harm to its openness. Inappropriate development is, by definition, harmful to the green belt and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. So the proposal will result in the loss of the open space, fundamentally changing the character of the site. And the proposal is therefore contrary to policy T2 of the local plan and the guidance within the MPPF relating to impacts on local green space and proposals affecting green belt. Notwithstanding the fundamental concern with the impact on the local green space, the overall layout, siting and scale utilises a large proportion of the site, resulting in an intensive form of development. However, the site layout would allow for bolstering of landscaping, as suggested within the landscape and visual amenity statement, which helped screen the site and improve the existing landscape setting and tree cover. The height of the buildings would be considered appropriate when viewed from Nicholson Road in the context of the existing built forms, and views from Riviera Way could be screened, thereby minimising any landscape impact and harm to the character and visual amenities of the locality. So whilst the development could be mitigated to result in compliance with policies D1, C5 and TH8, there is a fundamental conflict with the local green space designation. So moving on to amenity issues, the site is located in close proximity to a commercial area. Given its siting, scale and distance to nearby uses, it's considered that the proposal would not result in any unacceptable harm to the amenities of neighbours, with the addition of conditions discussed in the committee report. So in terms of highways, the proposal is considered to be unacceptable on highways grounds. Concerns are raised about traffic impacts and the lack of robust assessment around the integrity and performance of the highway. The new access road falls below the required width of 6.7 metres, required to accommodate two larger vehicles passing each other and where HGV movements are expected. Were two wider vehicles to meet, one would need to reverse, which could be backing out into Nicholson Road. Given the lack of visibility for any vehicles reversing into that road, and the location on a bend on the public highway, this could lead to disruption of through traffic, but it could also lead to a serious road traffic collision on the highway. So in respect of pedestrian access, the site will be accessed by extending an existing short section of private road off of Nicholson Road that leads to the private car park to the rear of the county court and then a cul-de-sac. Direct access into the courts is available from the car park. Parking in the cul-de-sac occurs regularly as a result of the demand for parking. The extended access road will lead down a steep slope, which is beyond the gradient set out in the highway standards, to a new buildings and car park, which includes a turning area for larger vehicles in the middle of the access. There is no continuous level footway along the existing or proposed access road from Nicholson Road. To try to address the lack of footpath provision, a new stepped access is proposed. This will consist of 18 steps, which are 1.5 metres wide, which is less than 2 metre width specified in the highway standards for new footpaths, which will exit onto Nicholson Road, south of the access road junction, and onto the opposite side of the existing footway along the highway. A landing pad on the highway land at the top of the steps is proposed to provide pedestrians with a safe crossing place, but it is located on the bend of Nicholson Road on an adverse camber with on-street parking obstructing visibility. The needs of mobility impaired pedestrians, be it disabled, elderly, those with pushchairs, deliveries, etc., who need to access the site, are therefore not met due to the lack of footpath provision into the site, and pedestrians unable to use the steps will be forced to share the access road into the site alongside HGVs and other traffic going into the site and the county court. So the site is therefore not accessible or inclusive as required by local plan policies and the MPPF. And similarly, there is a lack of safe provision for cyclists to enter the site. So in respect to parking provision, the site plan details 60 spaces, with 7 of these being disabled spaces. WSP, on behalf of the Highways Authority, have provided a worst-case parking requirements assessment. Whilst this assessment is noted, if each use class was restricted to a maximum of 25% of the floor area, this would result in a maximum floor area of 511 metres squared for each use. This would result in a parking requirement for Class B2 of 15 spaces, Class B8 of 3 spaces, and the 2 Class E uses of 17 spaces each. So this results in a total requirement of 52 spaces with 7 disabled spaces. So the parking supply detailed is therefore sufficient in terms of the numbers when compared to Appendix F, and assuming a planning condition is added restricting the uses to 25% each of the total floor area. So an HGV loading bay is provided, but no parking bay as required by the highway's technical standards. Without HGV parking, disruption on site may occur if 2 or more are present simultaneously. 9 parking spaces in the west of the site near the proposed steps are difficult to access safely should another vehicle be exiting, as the access is just 3.6 metres wide, which is less than the minimum 4.8 metres required for two-way movement. So the comments from WSP conclude that where improvements have been put forward, namely a pedestrian improvement in the form of steps, it is a compromise both in terms of safety and inclusivity. Given the major concerns raised relating to traffic impact, access and parking, together with insufficient information to agree the impacts of the proposal upon the surrounding highway, the Highway Authority objects to the proposal. So the applicant has stated that the inclusion of a footpath along the access road is achievable, but would render the scheme unviable due to the associated costs from retaining structures and works to widen the existing road as it joins Nicholson Road. Irrespective of if it was agreed that the addition of a footpath link would render the scheme unviable, the design of the site renders it inaccessible and therefore conflicts with the MPPF and local plan. And the MPPF is clear that when considering development proposals, it should be ensured that safe and accessible access to the site can be achieved for all users. This is considered to be a fundamental site acceptability matter and one which the applicant has noted cannot be achieved due to viability. So overall, the proposal is therefore contrary to policies TA1, 2 and 3 of the local plan and paragraph 115 of the MPPF. So issues of ecology are acceptable and can satisfactorily be dealt with by condition. The proposal is BNG liable and the information demonstrates that off-site habitat units will be required. This would all be secured via the mandatory BNG condition. In terms of trees, the council's senior tree officer is happy with the proposal, subject to conditions and securing a suitable landscaping scheme at the reserve matters stage. In terms of drainage and flood risk, the site is located in flood zone 1 and a critical drainage area, and the report explains that surface water drainage can be adequately secured by a planning condition. Matters relating to designing out crime and low carbon development are all considered to be acceptable and can be dealt with by suitable planning conditions. So the report concludes that as the proposal is not in accordance with the development plan, consideration needs to be given as to whether material considerations indicate that the application should be approved. In terms of benefits, the proposal would result in significant economic benefits from direct and indirect jobs and spending, and there is a very pressing need to improve economic performance, which is key to reducing income and employment deprivation in Torbay. It will help to deliver the Torbay economic growth strategy. So in terms of the economic element of sustainable development, the balance is considered to be substantially positive, and this carries significant weight. So the design of the site and the lack of accessible footpath renders the site inaccessible and therefore conflicts with the MPPF and local plan. The MPPF is clear about needing to provide safe and accessible access. And as I noted earlier, that's considered to be a fundamental site acceptability matter, which the applicant has said they cannot address due to viability. The proposal also raises other highways concerns, and this weighs significantly against the development. So the proposal is contrary to policy TE2 and paragraphs within the MPPF relating to local green space and greenbelt land. Whilst it's been put forward that Torbay has a very pressing need to identify additional employment land, and that the agglomeration advantages around Nicholson Road and Torbay's pressing need to improve the employment prospects in the area would result in very special circumstances, as identified in the highway safety section of the committee report. The design of the site renders it inaccessible in addition to raising other highway safety concerns, and the proposal therefore conflicts with the development plan and MPPF. Given the level of harm caused from the proposal from the lack of safe and suitable access for all, the threshold of very special circumstances is not met, and the proposal therefore conflicts with the NPPF. So the presumption in favour of sustainable development has been considered in the recommendation. The identified harm to the local green space provides a strong reason for refusing the proposed development. Whilst there are significant economic advantages to the proposal, the harm to the local green space and the failure to provide a safe and accessible site for all users, in addition to the other highway safety concerns noted, means that the adverse impacts of granting planning permission would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the framework taken as a whole. So the committee report considers all the issues mentioned in depth, and this has weighed up the proposals against the relevant local plan policies, which are noted on this slide. The relevant neighbourhood plan policies on this slide have also been considered, in addition to the NPPF and other material considerations. It's concluded that the public benefits of the proposal do not outweigh the adverse impacts that would result to the local green space, and this is considered to constitute a strong reason to refuse the application under paragraph 11DI of the framework. It's further assessed that the failure to provide a safe and accessible site for all users and the highway safety concerns raised conflict with particular policies of the framework. The paragraph 11DII directs decision makers to have particular regard to when assessing whether adverse impacts of the development would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. So for these reasons, the officer recommendation is that planning permission is refused, subject to the reasons detailed in the committee report and current on the PowerPoint slide, with the final drafting of reasons for refusal and addressing any further material considerations that may come to light to be delegated to the Divisional Director for Planning, Housing and Climate Emergency. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Clark. Now going to call upon Dr Rodney Halder on behalf of Torquay Neighbourhood Forum. Dr Halder, as you're aware, you have 5 minutes, and the clerk will let you know when you have 1 minute left.
Thank you. This statement has been reviewed and approved by the steering group of the Torquay Neighbourhood Forum. The Forum objected to the original application, P2023-0900, primarily because of the impact on the green space and no drainage details were provided. That application was withdrawn and Mr Jones has engaged with the Forum to address the issues surrounding the green space. Consequently, our consultee response to this updated application was supportive. The development will provide much needed employment space and can be implemented on a timely basis, so it is worthy of support if the issues of drainage and green space can be addressed. The Forum notes the drainage engineer's comment that he can accept the drainage plans being submitted and approved as a planning condition, and the Forum agrees with this approach. With regard to the green space, a key factor in the development and support of the neighbourhood plan at referendum was the identification, protection and preservation of green spaces. The one public objection references this protection of the green space. I have visited the site and reviewed the green space, which is not well maintained and has no public access. In correspondence with Mr Jones, we have established that the green space, separate from the development, will be enhanced and public access provided. The trees bordering the Riviera Way will remain. The green space situation generated major discussion within the steering group. Policy TE2 allows for minor improvements to community access or facilities that support their use for public recreation. The outcome of our debate was that the majority of members felt that the enhancement of the green space and the provision of public access outweighed the attrition of the area from the development. But this must be guaranteed through a planning condition and must not set a precedent for further attrition of green spaces. Apart from the issues which I have noted, our policy checklist, which is on the planning portal, showed compliance with most other policies. As this proposed development will deliver much needed employment space, the Forum asks that you overrule the case officer's recommendation and approve this application, provided that this must not set any precedent for further development on designated green spaces, and planning conditions are set, that the developer will restore the undeveloped portion of the site to provide suitable habitat for the resident species. A 15% on-site biodiversity gain is achieved to allow for the green space attrition. The developer or any future site owner will thereafter fully maintain the site to preserve its green space characteristics, especially that fronting Riviera Way. The development will allow public access for the amenity of the green space. Drainage issues are resolved and a plan approved, and a sustainable transport plan is agreed. If you agree to approve this application, I shall be pleased to speak at the time to reiterate these conditions or to hand you this statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Horder. I now call upon Councillor Long to address the meeting. As usual, Councillor, you have 5 minutes and the clerk will let you know when you have 1 minute remaining. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to speak. And I only tend to speak in front of planning on rare occasions, so it's an honour to be here. And this application is in the Barton with Watcombe ward, which I have the honour of representing. When I was the Cabinet Member for Regeneration in the last administration, I was advised that Torbay desperately needed more employment space, and that neighbouring councils such as Teignbridge are going really great guns on creating employment space, and so there's a real risk that local businesses could be relocating out of the bay and taking jobs with them. I fear that the officer recommendation on this case really risks sending the message out that Torbay is closed for business. These proposed employment units are at the edge of one of the most deprived wards in the Bay. Are we really saying no to jobs in a deprived ward? I would argue that deprivation issues really makes this a very special case and outweighs the concerns. I obviously haven't asked my fellow ward councillor, Councillor Fox, if he is in favour, as that would be not appropriate, but I know that my other ward councillor, Steve Darling, and the neighbouring councillors for Shippey are in favour of this application. The objections, I'm sure, and I was pleased to hear the Torquay Neighbourhood Forum's comments at this meeting, and I'm sure the objections can be resolved, and I would very much be grateful if this committee could vote in favour. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Long. I now call on Mr. Tim Jones to address the meeting in support of the application. Mr. Jones, you have 5 minutes and the clerk will let you know when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Tim Jones. I'm the applicant for this project. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and 2 project supporters. Firstly, Mr. Tim Weston. He is a commercial property specialist with 30 years' experience, who in the past and presently is an advisor on employment initiatives to Torbay Council. He states that Torbay has a chronic undersupply of modern industrial accommodation. The council's own development at Lymington Road and Torbay Business Park have been the only employment space provisions since the 1990s. There is no current funding for public projects for new workspace available. 2 senior Torbay policy officers have supported the application, recognising the need to boost Torbay's productivity, currently at 70% of the national average, and the fact that 42% of jobs are part-time. The latest Economic Development Needs Assessment commissioned by the Council calculates that 50 acres will be needed to satisfy demand, of which only 12 acres has currently been identified. Without a pipeline, out-migration to Teignbridge, such as Oak Tree Business Park, King Stainton, into Exeter, or within the Plymouth and South Devon Freeport will continue. There is known current demand for around 30,000 square feet of occupying space. This includes a specialist defence contractor and a medical equipment manufacturer. Torbay currently has nothing suitable to offer them. The second statement is on behalf of Mr. David Black, who is a specialist highway engineer, formerly the head of transportation at Devon County Council. He states that Nicholson Road is of good standard, but like much of Torbay, has topographical challenges. It serves a business park with 250 parking spaces. Also along Nicholson Road, 120 cars are routinely parked on a daily basis. Average traffic flows throughout the day are low. This road has sufficient spare capacity to operate without any congestion. There have been no accidents. This is a small scheme with minimal impact on the operation of the existing transport network, adding 13 cars and 1 goods vehicle and 2 cycle trips per hour. The scheme can comply with current car and cycle parking standards. Torquay Highway's inflexibility and response does not meet the test of MPPF, which states that development should only be prevented or refused on highway grounds where there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety. DOT guidance regarding access for pedestrians can be adhered to in addition to a travel plan. The local planning authority have proposed extensive enhancement works to the highway. I have conducted a cost analysis, and it is my judgment that these works are unnecessary and not viable for such a small development. My own statement, Chairman, is that the site was planned to be a Phase 2 development for Torbay Courts. The access was formed, but then funding was withdrawn. The site became surplus to requirements. Prior to acquisition, the land was allocated in the neighbourhood plan as green space. To satisfy the neighbourhood plan, employment use was regarded as policy compliant, subject to ensuring that we could agree a satisfactory conclusion with the neighbourhood plan team. You have heard Dr. Rodney Horder's comments, and I would emphasise that from the total site area, which is 3.5 acres, only 1.6 acres will actually be brought forward for development. The balance will remain as permanent green space. We subsequently submitted an application to establish the principle of employment use. It was not possible to identify the likely end users until consent had been granted. The planning submission was then classified as a major application. We were then drawn into providing indicative details of the building design and infrastructure, but still without knowing the nature of the end use. We would be happy for the outline to be conditioned. If the principle of employment is approved, this will then overcome the green space allocation. A detailed scheme could then be submitted once the end use has been finalised. This would enable us to overcome the single reason for objection. We confirm that the current infrastructure requirements for highway works render the scheme unviable. We can confirm that we can deliver this small scheme almost immediately and without the need for public subsidy. I would urge members to apply their local knowledge in this case. The balance is in favour of granting planning consent. This would help to deliver economic development for Torbay, which is desperately needed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. So, committee members, we now move to inviting questions to our planning officer. Please may I remind members, questions should only cover matters not raised in the presentation. Are there any members wishing to ask questions? Councillor Billings.
Thank you, Chair. I'm wondering if officers could assist me on a document entitled Technical Note 1, Trip Generation, Traffic Impact and Parking Swept Paths, where on page 2, at paragraph 3.2, it references HS2 Rural Road Design Criteria. I raise this because this is the part of the appellant's or the applicant's evidence which deals with Nicholson Road, which is the road that we saw on our site visit earlier, which had cars parked on both sides, where the road overall was of reasonable width, but access was a little bit challenging to get to the site. I'd appreciate some officer advice in relation to their thoughts on what's presented, please.
I'll just, we've got Sam Tell with us, who is from WSP but represents the Highway Authority, so he might be able to help in terms of some highways related questions. So,
just to clarify, did you say paragraph 3.2?
Yes.
And
yes.
So
it's the italics at the bottom of page 2 going into the start of page 3. At the top of page 3, it references where the italicized text has come from.
that's because it refers to a rural road, so is that actually appropriate in this context?
no, because it's an urban area. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just reading the paragraph that you've referenced, but in terms of the reference being HS2 rural road design criteria, this is an urban area, so we wouldn't consider that, because often with rural roads, it's generally focused on private vehicle movements, whereas urban areas, there's a lot more going on, a lot more commercial uses, employment uses, pedestrians, cycles, etc. So that reference, we wouldn't really consider it, and we at Torbay would consider our highways design guide, the adopted highways design guide, for things such as dimensions and designs.
So you wouldn't give weight to what's presented, you'd have a different view, different to that. Is that correct through you, Chair?
Yes.
Other Councillor Bye?
Thank you so much. And it's a very long report. Goodness me, it's a long report. But I did read it in detail. And I perhaps should know the answer to this. Right at the beginning, please, I'm a lay person and don't always sit on this committee. User class B2, B8, E little g Roman numeral 2, E little g Roman numeral 3. What are those user groups, user classifications, please? I didn't see that in the report, because it seems that you're talking about the amount of traffic and parking and all the rest of it, depending on what the mix is between those user groups, but you don't actually say, unless I missed it, what that user group is.
Yeah, so that's just the general use classes which are accepted in terms of planning policy. So B2 is general industrial use, B8 is storage and distribution, and then in terms of the E uses, EG II is research and development of products or processes, and then EG III is industrial processes.
So none of the users would be necessitating lots of members of the public to come and buy and sell and visit.
So none of the proposed use classes are main town centre retail uses, as defined by the MPPF.
Thanks for that. A lot of the report on the highways is sort of the lack of access for people that don't drive, and particular reference to the distance for buses and so on, bus users. Can you tell me how much further away this site is for the bus stops compared with the court or the Cavanagh headquarters or all the buildings up the top of the hill? And is it more difficult? Would it be more difficult to get to this site for work than if you were working for Cavanagh or whoever the people further up the hill might be? It used to be the Care Trust, I think. I used to go and visit when it was the old Primary Care Trust, but I don't think they're there anymore. Is it further? Is it steeper?
So the court is next to the site, so it would be the pretty much the same distance. And then the Kavana or the other land uses further north would be a slightly longer walk and a slightly longer, Nicholson Road does go up at a gradient on approach to those land uses.
Councillor Binnings? Sorry.
I should also say, officers, that your report was extremely detailed. Thank you. I think it's sort of over 70 pages. Forgive me, I was a little bit focused on the technicalities of some of the highways concepts to be as polite as my colleague, Councillor By, in terms of complementing that detail when I spoke earlier. I just wondered if I could turn to the other technical highways note, because I think it picks up with Councillor By's question, and this is the technical note 2, which again the appellants presented, where we looked at some references to steps, and it talks from the appellant's perspective, because clearly that's one of the issues that officers have concerns with, access for those with mobility. Oh, sorry, applicants, I apologise. Misspoke. Thank you for that correction. They've suggested some ways of mitigating impacts. They've suggested that steps would be okay for the majority of people with mobility impairments, and suggested that for those wheelchair users, that the majority might arrive by private car, and therefore they've driven down the access, and for those that couldn't, there'd be a phone number. I just wanted a view on that, obviously balancing these things, please.
Yeah, of course. Whilst there are disabled spaces within the car park, we still cannot allow, or the Highway Authority cannot allow a design which does not allow mobility impaired users who are wheeled users to not be able to access a new site. It's just like in terms of the MPPF, we've got paragraph 117, which says applications for development should, and then paragraph B of that is address the needs of people with disabilities and reduced mobility in relation to all modes of transport. So we can, and also in terms of the Torbay local plan policies, we've got policy TA2 development access, which says provide vehicle and pedestrian access to a safe standard, including a satisfactory standard of visibility, and also policy TA1 transport and accessibility, which says that developments should ensure most sustainable environmental modes of transport are promoted, and integral part of development, having regard for the following hierarchy of sustainability, with walking and cycling at the top of the transport user hierarchy.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if I may, as a final question on highways things, if we'd already got an HGV on site, looking at the layout plan that we've got, if that first HGV pulled in as far as it could into the site, in your professional view as officers, could you physically get a second HGV onto that site?
So there isn't another HGV parking space. So say, for example, on the master plan, there's a turning head with one HGV in there, and then there is a loading, unloading area slightly further down into the site, but it's unclear if it was a HGV, how that HGV would be able to exit that loading, unloading area safely without having to reverse an excessive distance. And also if, say, for example, in this scenario, the HGV that's in the turning head at present, if that's there, then it would be difficult.
If I may, so I appreciate it would be difficult. I appreciate that it wouldn't be ideal. Could you physically fit 2 lorries onto site? And could you then get the second lorry off site, do you think?
If there's cars parked in the parking spaces, then it would be, well, without the swept path assessment undertaken, we wouldn't be, I can't 100% say, but what I could say professionally, that if we have an HGV parked in the turning head and then another one that comes down, if you pull up the master plan, sorry, so if,
Do you want to show it on?
yeah, do you want me to use the cursor to explain? This one. That's it, yeah. So if you have a HGV parked here in the turning head and then another one turns up, the only place it could realistically go is in this loading bay here, but that turn would be tight if there's vehicles not parked correctly in the spaces. But additionally, so the vehicle comes in, enters the loading bay, but if it's a HGV, it would not be able to turn to then leave, so it would have to reverse back this distance, which represents a safety risk, and then it would have to ideally either come in, but that one's there blocking it, so it would have to then swing round. But again, this is quite theoretical in terms of everyone parking as it is, and also the safety risks that come along with it. And we've got this would be a private zebra crossing arrangement here, which if an HGV is there without a banksman, then that is a clear safety risk. And this gap here between the top of this disabled space and there appears very narrow as well.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, officers.
I did see Councillor Tolchard's hand earlier, so I'm going to let her go, and then Councillor Darling afterwards. Councillor Tolchard.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, thank you. It's a very comprehensive report. My question really follows on from Councillor By's question about the designations of the 4 different sorts of suggested units, and you very kindly explained what they were, and it rather sounds as if 3 of those designations would be the ones that would generate larger vehicles, because I think one was research and development, I think, possibly. Have we any idea, really, what kinds of vehicles these designations for the units would generate? Are they all likely to be HGVs? Do we know?
So in terms of, do you have the list of the land uses? Sorry. So in terms of light industry, the B2, B8, they definitely can generate HGVs. Again, it really depends on who that user is, who moves into the unit. Light industrial is more your sort of delivery vans size ones, and then research and development, that would be more cars, but they will still get deliveries, vehicles coming in and out.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. Thank you.
Councillor Darling.
Chairman, I'd like to just go back to the accessibility issue, if I may, please. So, we've seen the stairs that come from the site. So, if there is, am I right in thinking then, so people, somebody with a mobility disability, maybe a wheelchair or a buggy or something like that, or somebody with a pushchair, am I right in thinking that they would have to access the site via the road?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Penley.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going back to this slide and the scenario by which the second HGV would turn up, like probably not a policy compliant solution, but practically wouldn't the second HGV driver actually reverse in and they could easily drive out once they'd concluded their business?
You'd hope so, yes, but often I don't know. The units will be, I imagine, won't be the same business, so there'd be a need for them to coordinate, and it's more of a hypothetical situation that would be, but you'd hope they could talk to each other, but whether they will do, we don't know.
Councillor Fox.
Thank you. Thank you for a comprehensive report. Just following on from a couple of the questions that have already been raised about the HGVs on the site. Obviously there are 17, 18 units, so there's a likelihood or certainly a possibility that we could have even more than 2 HGVs. What's the likelihood in kind of real life that we would get a queue of HGVs coming on and making it extremely difficult and dangerous? That's my first question. My second question, the final question, is on the double yellows that may have to be installed on Nicholson Road, both in relation to HGVs turning to get onto that road from the site, and secondly, near to where the stepped access is. Do we know roughly how many parking spaces will be affected by that? Thank you.
So in relation to the first question of how many HGVs, so the applicant has submitted a report that says, I believe it's something about that in their calculations, they recommended, I believe it was 12 HGVs across the day. However, that is on the basis that those land uses are conditioned. And again, that is just that's them using the TRICS database, which looks at traffic surveys of similar land uses. However, often that's just a general expectation of the number. And in terms of your other question for Nicholson Road, so our concern was that if an HGV does meet a car, there is the effective width, because of parked cars either side, there is a concern that someone will need to reverse, and Nicholson Road is heavily parked on both sides, so they would probably have to reverse quite an excessive distance, which represents a highway safety risk. And then I think your third question in relation to double yellow lines at the top of the stepped footpath pedestrian entrance. So that would ideally be, you'd generally need 2 parked cars lengths just to ensure, because vehicles probably would encroach at either side, to then make sure that if that does happen, then at least there's a clear gap. So that would be 2 parking spaces removed. But what our bigger concern would be is that the traffic regulation order itself needs to go through the TRO process, which isn't often guaranteed, because people can put in objections to say we don't agree with this, and then therefore there's a concern that there may be objections because it is taking away parking spaces along a road that's already heavily parked. So there's no guarantee that that double yellow line can go through, would go through.
Chairman, if I could just come back on the first of those two. 12 HGVs per day. My understanding, admittedly it's limited, is that you get peaks and troughs and they don't all get spread out equally. And if we can't control this by condition, which I would say is probably unrealistic, then what are the chances that we're going to get, say, late morning, for example, coming down from Birmingham or wherever, you might get 2 or 3 lorries at the same time. What likelihood would you say that is?
On the basis that there's 17 different businesses in the park, then it would be difficult to control the deliveries and servicing of each business and get them to coordinate to have a scheduling for who can use the HGV or larger vehicle spaces and the loading and unloading bays.
Councillor Villy.
Thank you, Chair. Just moving on from HEVs, I think we've flogged that quite a bit. The business designations on this site, do they create the very special circumstances that allow you to build on Greenbelt?
So in terms of policy in the neighbourhood plan, T2, that lists off what they consider to be very special circumstances. It doesn't meet any of those justifications. So you then have to look at the MPPF, and I think the committee report goes into quite a lot of detail about the different paragraphs and what would constitute a very special circumstance, or what would be potentially appropriate or inappropriate development. So the particular development type itself would be considered inappropriate development in terms of the MPPF, but you then have to weigh it up in terms of, is there a very special circumstance? So the committee report does go into quite a lot of detail about the benefits which would be generated, you know, particularly from employment, so that all needs to be weighed up. But I think as it sort of summarises, the MPPF policy is clear around Greenbelt, that which also links obviously to the public green space, in that if there are other sort of material considerations that have not been addressed, so in this case sort of highways matters, then that again sort of leads you to conclude that a very special circumstances has not been met. So my consideration and my sort of advice in the committee report is that this application in front of us does not meet very special circumstances because of the impact and the inability to address the highways concerns which have been raised.
Thank you. Has there been any other circumstances where there has been build on green belt land within Torbay? And what were those businesses, if any?
The only one I'm aware of myself is the solar farm development. Is it broken? No. That's it, in Nightingale Park, sorry, yeah. So that's local green space. I think if you were to look at the MPPF, there might be more chance that falls within one of the more acceptable forms of development. But I'm not personally aware of any others which have taken place, but that's not to say there hasn't been.
So the economic benefits of this is not a very special circumstance for this site?
I think from my point of view, if we had addressed all the highways matters and that there was no objection in terms of highways, then my recommendation probably would have been approval, and that it would meet the threshold of very special circumstances. But because of the highways concerns, which haven't been addressed, it does not meet the very special circumstances threshold.
If the developer can overcome those objections that you just mentioned, would the scheme be viable?
I can't confirm viability. The applicant would need to consider that. They have put forward, though, a case to suggest that, I think as I noted in the committee report, that it is feasible to put in a footpath link, but that makes the scheme unviable. So that would suggest that the works and the changes which are required in terms of highway safety is not going to be viable for them.
So the applicant hasn't taken on board what you've said, and it's just not viable in his book then to do that.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor Bye, and then if no one else, I'll have a few questions as well.
Thank you again. Where in the hierarchy of sort of protection does a local plan designated green space come, say, in comparison with an area of outstanding natural beauty?
I think you'd have to look at the different policies that link. Both have paragraph 11 MPPF implications. So presumption of favourable sustainable development and can constitute strong reasons for refusal. So they would both constitute potentially a strong reason for refusal.
But we've just lost an appeal on the other side of the bay in an area of outstanding natural beauty where I think 70-something houses are now going to be built. Does this have a stronger category of protection?
There's been a few questions so far around other sites. We have to be ever so careful. We're dealing with this site, with this context, with those designations. It's easy to pull through different experiences, but we must, officers been really clear in the report about the implications with local green space and green belt. I think the office report is incredibly clear, so I don't want to try and pitch another hierarchy and trying to do a kind of X factor comparison between other sites. I think it's important just to stay focused on what the implications are on this site, because you're comparing two very different sites there, and with Councillor Verley as well. They're very different sites.
Councillor Pentley.
Thank you, Chairs. Apologies, my colleague beside me, I will go back to HGVs and highways. In the sense of typically, the units that you have here, typically, can you say are the occupiers of those kind of units in comparable cases, how often are they serviced with HGV traffic? Because, I've worked in areas where, similar estates where they're serviced by smaller kind of transit vans and whatnot. So if it's relevant, can you anticipate the kind of HGV traffic you would get based on those unit types that's been proposed?
So I've loaded up the applicant's transport technical note 2 earlier when I quoted 12. Their 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. is 9 HGVs that they predict using similar, but as was discussed, there can be peaks and troughs, and that's on the basis that the land uses are split within their 25% different land uses per the 4 different land uses, and ensuring the actual occupiers stick to that condition. That would be the indication.
All right, councillors. I'll just go a couple of questions, if I may. Sam, you mentioned about the difficulty in scheduling, but on hearing the answer to Councillor's Toldchild, it sounded like only half of the units would be used for businesses that might use HGV. And in given your answer to Councillor Pentney, if we're talking about 9 vehicles in a day, is it possible to do, I don't know, is it possible to do conditioning of scheduling so you overcome that so we haven't got that worry?
We need to be really precise with planning conditions, and our solicitor may want to come in here around precision of conditions and enforceability and monitoring, so it's incredibly difficult.
Yes, that's right. It would be quite difficult to enforce and monitor that. Obviously, you've got to make sure that the conditions they do meet the tests, which is obviously, you know, you wanted to try and make sure that the highways issues were overcome. But yes, it would be difficult to monitor and enforce those sorts of scheduling type conditions with so many different users.
Thank you. The other question I had is, I read your highways report, and thank you for that, Sam. It mentions about to safely accommodate 2 larger vehicles passing each other and needing 6.7 metres. Also, there was the issue that's been brought up about the accessibility for the need also for a shared pathway and cycle. So is the shared pathway and cycle in that 6.7 as well, or is that shared pathway on top of the 6.7? That's my first question.
Yeah, so the 6.7 is purely the carriage, 6.7 metres is purely the carriageway width, so the space where vehicles would be, and then next to that would be a 2 metre wide footway, which at the moment the applicants proposed a 5.5 metre wide carriageway only.
Thank you. So in that, was there specific reasons why not to look at a single pathway for the vehicles and then have this shared on the side? Because that would get to 5.65, so not too far off the 5.5.
Well, whilst we can't design the site, that sort of single area would be difficult to understand who would have priority in the visibilities because of the gradient and the bend. So I imagine that would be quite difficult to actually deliver and make it safe without vehicles coming into conflict with each other.
Okay, it's the only reason I was asking is, I mean, I drove up Nicholson Road, and because you've got cars parked on either side, frankly, any car goes up Nicholson Road has to stop at times for others to come. It's just a part of it, and HGV, Sainsbury's vehicles, cars will all do the same. And I'm just trying to get my head around making a much wider in one place, but actually the usage would be okay in another place. But that's what I was asking. Thank you. That was me done. Colleagues, oh yes.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one for Verity. You mentioned some economic benefits earlier in terms of figures. Could you just remind me of those, please?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch what you said. In terms of what?
The economic benefits of having this site developed. You mentioned 1 million, 1.5 million. Could you remind me what those figures were for?
I can read off the committee report if that would help. Just bear with me. So it's on page 47 of the committee report. It says section 5 and 6 of the report, so this is the applicant's economic report, identifies construction phase and operational phase impacts, including that the operation of the proposed development has the capacity to support circa 60 FTE jobs on site, It's also estimated that 40 net additional FTE jobs will be directly supported within the Torbay economy, with a further 20 direct net additional FTE jobs sourced from sub-regional area. An additional 20 FTE jobs could be generated and supported via indirect and induced effects, including contracts within the supply chain, salaries, and onward expenditure across Torbay. A further 20 indirect and induced FTE jobs will be supported across the sub-regional area. The proposed development will generate economic productivity in the form of GVA uplift annually, and there is the potential to deliver an annual net additional 1 million GVA contribution to the Torbay economy each year, with this being part of a wider 1.5 million contribution generated across the sub-regional area.
Thank you.
Councillor Billings.
Sorry, Chair, I have one further question, if I may. I was trying to relate, officers, the highways position in relation to this proposal with the highways position in other sites around the bay where there's been employment development. And I was thinking about the Trojan Industrial Estate near Asda in Paignton, and I called it up on Google Maps, and I note that there's no pedestrian footway going into there as you go down Borough Close. The road also looks narrower than the suggested widths that we're saying. I'm not aware of that causing a historical problem. Now, clearly, as time passes, standards improve for obvious reasons to try to get better quality development. I'm just wondering how, when we're balancing this in our minds, how it's appropriate to consider those examples in relation to the policy standards, and how, if one was to consider that there was a justification for exceptional circumstances to allow this for the reasons you just heard in relation to their economic benefits, how we might weigh that up, and I would appreciate some officer advice in relation to that, please. Thank you.
Don't think you could find a more detailed report that weighs up all those and balances all those. We're not going to pull out and specify different sites around and do a comparator with roads from the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. We've clearly explained on site what the restrictions are and the difficulty with Nicholson Road, and the report weighs out really clearly. So I'm just really conscious we don't want to repeat what's in the report and then do an exploration on other sites. I think it's incredibly clear in the report, with respect.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Bye.
Am I allowed to ask? You've brought this to us, but you're very, very strongly, it seems, and very clearly saying on the highways and other grounds, turn it down. What are the consequences? Shall we go against your advice? In reality, is it officers advise and members decide?
Chair, if I may. Yeah, Chair, if I may answer that question. Members of a quasi-judicial committee such as this obviously have to ensure that decisions comply with being reasonable, and obviously, you know, there's that potential of challenge if a decision is irrational and, you know, as I say, doesn't meet reasonableness tests. So that would be the risk of not having sound decision making.
Any further questions before I open up to debate, colleagues? Right, let's move to that part, debate time. Councillor Penny.
Just happy to just get the ball rolling, so to speak. So obviously in the officer's report, there are two broad reasons for refusal, and personally, where I am, I discount the green spaces one because that seems a bit like the kind of the letter of the law conflicting with the spirit of the law in terms of, it's inaccessible green space as it stands. And as we heard from the speakers, if we were minded to approve the application and it was developed, it would actually, serve to enhance some of that green space. So obviously where I am in my mind is very much around the highways impact. I would note it's noticeable that whenever you talk about highways, we talk about road safety in general. That's a big thing because you're talking about if you get it wrong, increasing the risk of highway collisions, injury, or worse. And obviously, that's a really, really bad thing. But I'm also aware that there's been relatively few objections to this application, and we've only had speakers for the application. The economic argument is a very strong one for the reasons Councillor Long outlined. So yeah, it is difficult because we have to apply these policies, we have to look at this specific case, but I can't help but, kind of like yourself, Councillor Billings, be mindful of those other areas in Torbay and beyond where, it's an industrial area, you kind of have a different expectation about, the highways there, but obviously that cannot be factored in any decision we come to. So I'll stop there, but that's where I am in my mind in terms of discounting the green spaces argument for the reasons stated, but trying to find a way forward on the highways.
Councillor Fox?
I entirely agree with Nick, and also with Councillor Long earlier, that in terms of the economic arguments, I think there's no difference between any of us. I think we all would want this if everything else was right. That's easy, I think, if anything's easy in this world. And then in terms of the green space, again, I think we're all at one around the table. And we've heard anyway that there could be some important enhancements in terms of tree planting and in fact making the views more pleasant than they are now. Although I think we've got quite an impressive sweep of trees as we come in along Riviera way as it is. It's really good in my view. So it's all about, as I see it, the highway and the parking. And I've got three concerns, and I'll just air them, and then I've got an open mind. I just want to see what people's response are. And I think the first one is that the access road is too narrow and leads to potential difficulties or worse. I think my second concern is lack of disabled access, and that's where I probably would take issue with Councillor Billings looking at an older estate. I think we've moved on since the 80s. We've got higher expectations on facilitating disabled access, and I really want to sort of see what people's views are around that. And my third concern is about the HGVs on the site. We've heard that we can't control, that there may be one figure given was 7, another was 12 per day, serving 17 units, that fluctuations will come, and there could well be a likelihood around mid to late morning we could get a number of HGVs turning up on this site. So those are my three concerns. I mean, my heart's telling me that we want the jobs, and I just want this site to be successful. But I've just got these nagging doubts, and I would just like other people to comment on those doubts I've just raised.
Councillor Bye.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. we desperately need the investment, the regeneration and the jobs. And Torquay gained 20-something million from this government for neighbourhood plans, or for neighbourhood support, neighbourhood funds to get the right word. Not because we matched all the numbers on some lottery, but because we are the poorest town in the southwest. We are the only town in the southwest that is recipient of that particular funding. For me, it would seem extraordinary to turn away, and people up the line might think it extraordinary if we turned away investment of this sort at the same time as putting out the cap and wanting government and others to help us. This is an opportunity for employment in what is clearly a business and employment area on land which I believe was always intended to be developed as employment land. I'm absolutely delighted that the chairman of the Neighbourhood Forum, with whom I don't always see eye to eye, but nonetheless has taken the trouble to come here this afternoon and give it his blessing. I see him and the Neighbourhood Forum as the holders of the flame in terms of the neighbourhood plan and the green space designation. So if he's happy, I'm happy with that. And I don't think that any of us around the table, from what has been said so far, are unduly worried about the designation of it as a green space. You have to have these compromises, and the important thing, I think, is to maintain the trees and all the rest of it, which will screen and protect the site. When I went up there this morning, I didn't join the rest of you, I went there this morning. You know, it is a very low quality area, strewn with litter. It is not a public space or place or anything that anyone would enjoy. So, you know, let's move on and get the investment. The highways issues, I think it's in two categories. Some of it is accessibility, rather than pure highways and safety issues. It was accessibility. But as I tried to make, you know, get the response from the officers in my questioning, the accessibility is no different. In fact, it is slightly more convenient than the neighbouring employment spaces, the court, the Cavanaugh's headquarters, and all the other places further up the hill. We can't help the topography of Torquay. You know, it is a hilly town, so perhaps sometimes there will be compromises in terms of, for convenience, in this case, making a pedestrian access that involves steps further along the Nicholson Road. Those I accept with disabilities, if they are going to be in with prams and things, are not going to want to use steps, but there is the road, or they may well come in a vehicle. When I went up there today, it struck me as being a quiet road. I don't think there were any vehicle movements in the 15, 20 minutes that I was there. It was pretty well parked, so clearly earlier in the day people arrived, and presumably now people are going, but it is a cul-de-sac. It's not a busy through road that leads anywhere other than to the various employment spaces and the court. So I think it's a balance. I am in a way disappointed with the report. The report is an extraordinarily lengthy report, but that should be, I thought, presenting a balanced view, and it's for members, I would have thought, to weigh those balances. And for me, I think it's entirely reasonable with the various suggested conditions that are mentioned in the reports, and we'll perhaps, under your chairmanship, we'll look at those conditions if members are minded to approve. But I think it is entirely reasonable in the economic circumstances that we find ourselves to welcome this investment and support this project. Thank you.
Councillor Darling.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we need to send a message out, as Councillor Long said, that Torbay is open for business. Otherwise, people will go elsewhere. And this is a site that is near an area of deprivation, and it's great that it will it would bring jobs. So in that way, I really feel that this is a good thing, a thing to say yes. I do have a little issue, unfortunately. In the day job, I live and breathe accessibility, so I do, feel a little bit that maybe, that there should be more accessibility. But I think balancing the whole thing up, I think that that there is access, there is a way in, and I just wonder, the type of units are there, how much footfall will actually go, and also looking at the HGVs, whether, I think somebody's already mentioned, whether they will all be serviced by HGVs or whether they be white vans and smaller vehicles. So, yeah, I think it's something maybe we should welcome it, but it is a little difficult with the accessibility, but thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Darling. Councillor Billings?
Thank you, Chair. I really would pass my appreciation to officers for the extremely detailed report, which has gone through the details that this committee has just been grappling with. And you can see from the debate, there's some key issues here. And considering the relatively modest size of the development, the issues that it raises, and the importance of those in the context of balancing economic growth versus some of the concerns we've got about local green space sites and also highways. So thank you, officers, for that. My attention was drawn to two key parts of the report. The first was on page 35 of the report, where on the second paragraph we're given the example of how the economic benefit of the Nightingale solar farm was sufficient to, on economic reasons, justify development in a nearby local green space. And we also heard earlier from the chair of the Torquay Neighbourhood Forum in relation to the proportion of the site that was given for improvements as a proportion of the site's overall area, as to why the forum was persuaded on that. So I think taking those two things in the round, I'm not persuaded that the local green space designation is a key issue. The second key point of the report for me was on page 46, and that's the second paragraph underneath the heading Impact on Highway Safety, where officers remind us about paragraph 116 of the MPPF towards the bottom of that paragraph, where we're reminded that developments should be refused on highways grounds if there would be either an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impacts following mitigation would be severe, and what the second part's referring to is capacity. Now, the officers, I think, in their presentation and the questions have given us clear evidence that the highways capacity grounds, they're not ideal. The access road at various points, the applicants themselves have pointed to the fact that there's various areas where the road is effectively a single carriageway. It's give way. We know the entrance is not ideal. It doesn't meet the standards. I'm clear in my mind it's not ideal. I'm not yet at the position where that would be severe. And I recognise that impact needs to be severe to justify refusing this. As I say, I'm clear in my mind it's not ideal. And the second point is in relation to the safety point. There's unacceptable impact on highway safety. Now, I find it difficult to say that just because this access doesn't meet our standards, it will necessarily be unsafe. And I think recognising that lots of the discussion has been around heavy goods vehicles, the professional drivers, we're not seeing a huge amount of safety incidences in relation to access to business parks around the bay, which have been built against standards that were in place at the time. And so therefore I think in relation to those, recognising this is a smaller constrained site, it clearly doesn't meet the standards which I would be hoping would be met for a much larger development on a larger area. I think it's difficult in my mind to justify refusal on highways grounds in relation to this site. And that, Mr. Chairman, was my balancing of those two reasons. But I did find the officer's report uniquely helpful in terms of investigating all of these, because these are very key issues. Thank you.
Any further debate? Yes, Councillor Verdi.
I was just looking at the economic benefits, which Verity reminded me of. Personally, I think it's a very special circumstance. I think the benefits it's going to bring to the bay and the area are immense. The Greenbelt is doing nothing economically for the area and the jobs it's going to create and the revenue that's going to come from that in years to come. You can have government handouts, but those are exactly what they are, just handouts. And this will go into the future, generating income and revenue for the area. I'd very much say I'm in favour of the development, and I think the points that Mike highlighted, I think if something can be done there, some enhancements to make accessibility better, then I think we should go forward with it. Thank you.
Councillor Tolshard.
Thank you, Chair. I actually thought the report was very balanced, in fact. There was considerable emphasis on the employment and economic benefits. So balancing that against the obvious highway difficulties. So it is a really difficult one, I think. And there are the designations, such as the local green space, which we do have to consider. But I think it has already been said, it's not a particularly picturesque local green space. It currently has no access to it for people to actually use. It probably could be enhanced. So I actually feel that the employment and economic benefits actually outweigh the importance really of the local green space in this case. I think most of our concerns did centre around the highways difficulties. And we've talked a lot about the highways or the difficulties within the site, but there are also the difficulties with the access road itself, Nicholson Road, and those difficulties are made much worse by the fact that there's parking on either side. So I know that we have to look at this as it is presented, but whether those difficulties can be mitigated in order to, make the site more accessible and that kind of thing, that would have to be considered at a later date. But it is a difficult one for us all, I think. But I do think the report was very balanced, and probably in truth, were there no highways difficulties, then the recommendation, I've no doubt, would be approval because of those economic benefits. So that's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Tolshard. Councillor Tolshard. Just putting my thoughts into the debate, colleagues, we got, I think, two sticking points. One is the access, so the road into the site, and then secondly, there's the inside the site and safety. I was very interested to hear Councillor Darling's opinion. If we follow the letter of the law, it's access for all. When I read the report, I did sort of ponder pushchairs. I thought, I can't see people pushchairs down there, but it is accessibility for disabled, etc. That's not my particular field, but if we don't approve this, we are stopping a fantastic opportunity for our bay on an economic ground. So it's whether the access for all outweighs, in our opinion, the economic benefits. I personally am on a favouring of, it's not ideal, but it's an okay compromise. We will still have access for cars to take disabled down. It won't get every single person down who's disabled, but I think if you're going all the way up there, you're already at the point where you're in a car. So in my mind, I'm okay with the access other than the proposals for 5.5 metres, and we're told we need 6.7 for 2 vehicles. The second thing, though, is what I'm thinking. When I heard that 50% of the offices, so 8 potential units, are the only ones who are going to have HGVs, and the number of HGVs could be, 1 an hour, then I'm not particularly worried about the width of the road at 5.5 compared to 6, because I don't see us having lots of vehicles stopping and having to go past each other in this circumstance. So then I'm personally comfortable with the access. But then that's the internal and the moving of vehicles around and the safety of it. I don't know how, if we're able to cover in conditions that, which is I'd like to talk a little bit more about. Councillor Billings.
I think what I would say, Chair, just presenting almost like the counter-argument to the thrust of the way this debate's going and the way that Councillor Fox did earlier, just to test the thinking of members. If one of the key things that the officer report identifies is the width of the access to development, we haven't had any evidence submitted by the applicant to show that increasing the width of this isn't viable. We've had a very clear statement. We're taking that at face value. If this was, say, a listed building, we would be asking for a report. Obviously, that has a cost impact with it. So I think it's necessary, because I'm recognising the way the discussion is going, Chair, just to sort of provide that balanced view. That clearly would use land that was in the curtilage of the applicant. There wouldn't be a technical reason why, from my side, it's one that's being cited as cost. I just want members to be aware that if we're taking a view that that's not a key issue, we very much are taking this on sort of that we're okay with what we are. Now, I think in my mind, I'm largely in that position because I think that the access road to the site is so not ideal that in insisting rigidly to strict adherence to our standards within the site, that's the point where I struggle a little bit on. But I just would highlight to all members, we've heard an explanation as to we can't do the access within the site to the standards by way of cost. We don't actually have any clear evidence to back that up. I appreciate we're taking the application as it's come before us, and I think what would probably have assisted, I'm not sure whether this went through the pre-application process, and perhaps if it had done so, if it hasn't, whether that would have been a more helpful way to have avoided the committee being in the situation that we are now, grappling with that. And I think that's a comment we've made on other applications, and I would, if this hasn't been through that process, that's a plea I would make for other applicants to do so, to make future planning committee meetings a little bit quicker and the committee's job easier in other situations, please. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Penny.
I mean, obviously, I opened up the debate, so listening to what's being said, I mean, Councillor By, your point, I think, was very prescient about, Torquay being the only town in the southwest to be awarded, what's it called, the Future Plan for Neighbourhoods, whatever it's called these days, and there's a reason. And that the fact that we are so deprived in Torquay does magnify, like a magnifying lens against the economic considerations that as a committee we should be applying. And it does so much to the point where I think, you know, on balance, it does tilt the balance, you know, those highway concerns notwithstanding. And I think if reasonable observers, you know, there aren't too many tonight, although obviously these gents are reasonable, of course, but the average person in the street would say, well, we're slightly mad not to be driving forward the economic agenda, citing highways concerns around an industrial unit area. And Councillor Biddings, you made the point that, you know, HGV drivers are professionals, and you know, this obviously doesn't address the absence of what perhaps we would like to see in terms of highways provision, but that's a reality of it. In these industrial places, wherever you go, they have to overcome those issues, and we do have that driving, pressing economic need. So, like I think perhaps the majority, if not all of colleagues on the committee, I think I'm now in a place that balance. And we have to be bold as a committee sometimes, and I think this is one of those occasions where we have to say, yeah, this is far from ideal, but we can't make the perfect the enemy of the good. And I think that's a risk we'd be doing, with all respect to the officers, if we did follow their recommendation.
Councillor Bye.
Yes, just finally, I think there's a danger that we set the bar too high and then things just don't happen. So absolutely, I agree with Councillor Petney. For me, the two fundamental points are that this is a business park and employment space that is not going to be generally attracting large numbers of members of the public. It is going to be employees. It is going to be people who are there for reasons of business. It is people who are used to and skilled in manoeuvring their trucks and other vehicles. It's not a retail park. That's number one. But number two, you know, all credit, I would not have thought that the applicants would go to the trouble of drawing up plans and hopefully investing their money in something that doesn't work. You would have thought that, you know, that they know to some extent what they are doing. I can immediately think of business parks and areas and places and spaces which are congested and don't work well. And I look at a plan up there, we can all just look at it again, that appears to me to have been reasonably well thought through, even if it doesn't meet the very highest bar. So there we go. Let's go for it.
Councillor Fox.
Well, I've heard a lot of interesting comments in the last hour. I think Mandy Darling's comment where she discussed accessibility, and I think if Mandy can feel it's, as it were, superseded by the importance of the economy in this area, then that has actually swayed me. So Mandy, I think you've done a good job there in persuading me. I'm still right down the middle on this one, but I'll be voting for it.
Chair, recognising the debate and the direction, and also particularly that last comment from Councillor Fox, I wondered whether we might, through you, ask officers for advice of, if members were minded to grant approval, what conditions officers would advise to mitigate lots of the points that have come through in debate, please.
Officers.
We can certainly provide a list. We wouldn't read through every single one. We could provide the potential list, and then we would go through the delegated powers, working closely with you to complete those conditions, if that's the next step you'd like to take.
I think, Chair, if I could just follow up and ask for a little bit more detail. During the presentation, we heard a point about 25% of different units. I just wonder whether we could just touch on that again, just to refresh members' memory. This debate's gone on for a little while, and it would assist me.
So you could potentially add a condition on that states that each use class only constitutes 25% of the overall floor area on the site. The reasons for that is linked to obviously the highways capacity and the parking on the site. Is it enforceable? I think yes, if you word the condition correctly, and probably you'd need to have that detail then come forward in terms of where the use classes are, maybe at the reserved matters stage. I do think it's quite challenging, but the applicants put it forward as a suggested condition, so that would seem to indicate that they believe that that is workable.
And through you, Chair, if I may, were there any other suggested conditions that they put forward? I wasn't able to pick up any others. I might have missed them.
In terms of suggested conditions from the applicant, I can't think that there's any particular ones in terms of sort of highway safety. I don't know, maybe if Sam would have any comments in terms of if any conditions could be added which would maybe help to mitigate or improve the highway situation?
I think we'd probably need to have a think about it, really, instead of deciding right now. Sorry.
I would say we'd focus in on themes. So if there's anything particular you'd like to cover, we could provide a list potentially of those and do them as a delegated powers. But if there's anything that you think, if this is your money to approve, then if there's anything that you'd like to raise now, that's fine. But we would follow a fairly standardised list, and professional officers would write those and get delegated authority from the chair rather than anyone else.
I think, Chair, that's an extremely helpful suggestion from Mr. Blackwell. I think in my mind, seeing as it's come from debate members, and I'd appreciate other members' thoughts, there's two key themes that we've touched on. First of all, there's the local green space designation, the second is highways. I think it's certainly in relation to highways, there would be the opportunity to, for example, through a TRO, which I think was mentioned by officers, do something about the access through Nicholson Road. I think that should be the developer's obligation, not fall back to the local highways authority if that's considered appropriate to do something. I would also think that, so in other words, funding the costs of any necessary TROs on Nicholson Road, and also certainly within the site in terms of any operational arrangements. And I think to ensure that we've got appropriate planting of trees and the area designated for local green space. To me, in terms of themes, I think I'd be looking to officers to, in a later stage, provide the detail to draw those through. That would be my thoughts.
Yes, we can come to a suggested list, but one thing to bear in mind, you will need to kind of document the reasons from departing from the officer's recommendation. So we've heard around the economic argument and various others, but you will need to come to that conclusion before you take it any further with voting, I imagine.
Councillor Penny. To try and on the back of Mr. Blackwell's point there, obviously, you know, if we are, as I believe we are, seek to approve this, given those reasons, and I would suggest, and others will refine, I'm sure, you know, obviously in respect to the green space designation, which was one of the two reasons in the officer's report for refusal, we would say we're pushing for approval because in our understanding, it's our interpretation that the economic argument outweighs that and does indeed make it, I can't remember the phrasing, is the special circumstance. I'd say we disagree with officers in that respect. And in respect to highways, whilst we recognise concerns around highways, we do not consider them such to ultimately you know, scupper the application as a whole. I would say again, that's just a steer. I'm sure others can take forward and hopefully add to and refine as the broad reasoning why I think we should approve this application.
I mean, for me, it's very simple that the considerable economic benefit outweighs the other issues. And absolutely, Councillor Darling saying that we want to give out the message that Torbay is open for investment and welcomes investment of this sort.
Mr. Blackwell.
Just trying to summarise some of the things that Councillor Billingy said about severity and severe, I think. I mean, if you're going to document something, you've made obviously a judgment as a group about severity, and we're talking about accessibility here, not just it's highway safety as well. So you need to be really clear on the judgment you're making, and be clear on the way you're heading.
Chair, so I think Councillor Pentney's and Councillor Byers provided a very useful position on the LGS. In relation to highway safety, the point that I advocated earlier at debate was my understanding from Page, and I do wish we were able to find a way of putting paragraph numbers on officer reports, particularly when we do them to this level of detail. But I think my point was that returning to paragraph 116 of the MPPF, it makes it clear that developments should only be prevented or refused on highways grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety. That's the first point. And whilst I'm prepared to accept there might be an impact, I don't think it's unacceptable. Or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be severe, and this point's referring to capacity. And I don't accept that any capacity impact would be severe. I accept that within the site, and also along Nicholson Road. It's not ideal, but I don't think it's met the bar of severe from a capacity perspective or unacceptable on a safety perspective. And I say that recognising that this isn't, as described, something that's primarily focused on retail and the general public. This is something that's focused on businesses, there'd be professional drivers. Yes, there would be larger vehicles, but I think the relatively low overall numbers that we've heard of, I don't think that we've got to the position where refusal would be justified in paragraph 116 of the MPPF. That was my view. Other members might want to add their views to it.
I think you've covered that. I think that's clear, and we've documented that. So you're taking a different view from the professional officer, but that's clearly recorded now. Thank you.
So that documents the reasons why we're going against officer recommendation. Then we just to clarify the conditions and then list of and then delegated authority. There are certain conditions that were mentioned in the highways report. Those conditions that don't go against what we're saying about approval, though, because there's no point in getting a condition that ultimately goes against what we're saying of approval. Could you kindly cover those now, just to mention those, so we're in agreement with them?
Could you give us 5 minutes or so if you want this covered now?
Yeah, we'll take a 5 minutes.
Is it something that could just wait until a few days, and then we can just think about this in a lot of detail?
The specific wording would be later, Sam, but the actual overriding theme of the condition we need to hear now. And also in the 5 or 10, this is fine, we've got time. The ones on the green space to, the conditions of, 1.4, I think, was from the commercial, 1.6, the issues that Dr. Halder mentioned. Not maybe all of them, but certainly a couple of them. Councillor Billings.
Chair, I just appreciate the input of the Council's senior planning solicitor who's up next to you, whether actually on those matters we might be able to just raise the themes without going into them in any extra detail, and leave not only the further sort of specification of the different topics within those themes to officers, but also that wording, just to give a greater extent of delegation to yourself, to officers in consultation with yourself, recognising we are going contrary to the officers' report, and obviously they haven't possibly come prepared for these.
That's fair. Clark.
I I can give you a little bit of a prepared list if you'd like to hear a couple of suggestions, just to the broad strokes of some conditions, if that will help. But I do think it would be good if you could look to delegate the final, obviously, wording and, you know, potentially add more if it comes to light that's needed. So standard conditions relating to reserved matters, so appearance and landscaping need to be submitted. You would be wanting to restrict the use classes to those specified, so B2, B8, the two use classes in the E. You wouldn't want any additional Class E uses because they would be main town centre uses, and we haven't done any retail impact assessments. Biodiversity measures contained within the reserved matters submission. Ecology enhancement measures, a landscaping scheme to be submitted with the reserved matters, construction environmental management plan, a landscape, so a LEMP plan. These are sort of recommended by our ecologist. Not to take works not take place during bird nesting season, conditions relating to repeat badger surveys, construction demolition management plan, conditions relating to contamination, flood risk assessment details, so surface water drainage. You'd be wanting to look at conditioning tree protection. I think there was also a further arboricultural method statement that the tree officer requested. If you wanted any details in terms of the final design, so if we wanted any submission at the reserved matters stage in terms of the external appearance of the building. External lighting details to make sure it doesn't impact on wildlife. Designing out crime measures. Waste and recycling storage, you'd be wanting to make sure you get the condition details of that. Securing bicycle storage. Securing the stepped access. Probably look to secure that by condition rather than looking to obtain any monetary sort of section 106. But that would mean that if they couldn't achieve that by potentially like the road traffic order, that might mean then that condition couldn't be achieved, so you couldn't actually then come forward with the development. Car park and road management plan, securing parking, travel plan, hours of delivery onto the site. There was a recommendation in terms of noise levels from the environmental health officer, and then also details in terms of energy and sustainability. That was my starting list. So I think
Chair,
maybe Sam. Oh, sorry.
I think you do need to give the officers a few days to sort of get this sort of dot the I's and cross the T's. It's quite complex stuff that we've talked about tonight.
And Dr. Holder said he got his list and would hand them in, so we won't need to repeat, and we can look at those in particular. That's the way to do that. Councillor Billings.
Compliment the officers, considering the report was in one direction, for that incredibly detailed list. So not only have we got an incredibly detailed officer report, but we've had that preparation for an alternative outcome. So well done to the officer team for that. I think I heard that the references to that rather extensive list would include measures, to example, so if the footway didn't come forward, you wouldn't be able to build one of the units and then occupy it. That sort of thing would be dealt with in conditions, so in other words, the footway. And I presume as part of the scheme of conditions that could be delegated to officers in conjunction with yourself, Chair, that we could look at the improvements to Nicholson Road itself in terms of any TROs necessary to give passing places that officers thought would be appropriate, and also anything in relation to internal the site to further particularise what we've got, as well as the LGS. And I think from that perspective, I think personally, I think if we are going to approve it, that's the list. And so to help the discussion, I'd be quite happy to propose approval subject to the delegation of conditions to officers in consultation with yourself to include, but not limited to, that extensive list that we've just heard and those other themes I've raised. That would be my proposal, and I'd open it up to the floor for other members to comment on it, Chair, to take the discussion forward.
Which is great, Councillor Billings, because we needed a proposal. So we got a potential proposal. Colleagues, or Councillor Pentley?
I mean, I think that covers everything and offers enough flexibility, so I'm happy to second that.
We got a proposal, we got a seconder. All in favour?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone. Before you jump to go, sorry, we got the item 6, please. If we can just call to order. This is to note the Appeals Monitoring Report, Appendix 1. I call on Mr. Jim Blackwell to present the report, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this is a report that should be noted by members. It provides information on the recent appeal decisions between January and July. Although you will receive those by email, the purpose of the report is to kind of monitor and inform future decision making. You should be aware that officers fully consider these decisions. They form part of material considerations. We discuss them at our team meetings. Any outcomes are included in our regular training. We welcome to invite you to be involved in any future training on decision making, particularly around maybe an annual site visit, which I've mentioned before, which we could arrange and go to some of these sites and do a review. As part of that review, you'll see one of them was Copythorne Road, Brixham, in the report, and many of you, I think, have been involved in a post-decision briefing on that and understand the implications. And again, you brought that up today, so it is an important one. If there are any other decisions of interest, happy to review them in the future, obviously not now. You'll note the number of allowed decisions that have taken place. We're still, as officers, confident in our decision making. And we believe we've reached this. We're in the middle of this report. We can just talk to you about that at a second, another time, I think. Many of you have been involved in. So you note the number of allowed decisions. As officers, we're confident in our decision making. We've got some very strong decisions that have and responses from the inspectorate that support us, and there'll be no award of costs as well, just to make you clear on that. And one other point to note is the number of current refusals. We are, officers, I think a few of you know that we've been using Power BI, a new data visualization tool. It's really clear we're refusing a lot less applications, which reflects in the higher number of pre-application inquiries, and as councillors on this committee, you've mentioned numerous times tonight again about the value of pre-application inquiries. We set ourselves a target of 20 a month. Last month we reached 31, which is the highest we've ever had. And I think the link between the lower numbers of refusals, the higher number of pre-application inquiries, I really hope that trend continues. And it certainly adds a lot of certainty to the planning process. And we've just debated and talked about this application for well over 2 hours. You know, pre-application inquiries are the kind of backbone to these things. It adds so much certainty and really good value for money. So we'll continue to do that, but to let you know that there's a correlation, that I do believe there's a correlation between the two things. So thank you, and that draws that to a close, hopefully.
Members, do you have any questions? Councillor Billings.
It wasn't so much a question, it was a comment, and to observe how infrequently it is that this committee is finding differently to officers' reports. And recognising we've just had an example where we did, I'd actually like to say thank you to the officer team, because the fact that so many times there's that alignment really shows how much trust and appreciation there is from members in relation to the work done by the officer team. And so recognising what the discussion we've just had, I thought that was necessary to add, and the appreciation, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
And two comments I wanted to make, colleagues. One was just to note that with the pre-apps jumping, I mean, that's a 50% increase on the target, and that is a real push by all of us. You know, I talked at the cabinet just recently about the importance of pre-apps and improving the system for all applicants and getting it right first, and it saves an inordinate amount of time for both the applicants, the council, and then at times us. So it is the way to go forward, and encourage all my colleagues, who are on the committee, keep encouraging that out to the community.
Just to add to that 31, there are some fairly minor household applications, but a lot of those are large-scale schemes, medium to larger scale. So you mentioned about economic and regeneration and Torquay and where we are, but at Torbay, that's a real spread around the bay and some larger schemes as well. So there is a lot going on at Pre-App, so you should expect some applications coming through for determination at the committee.
And I can assure colleagues that, you know, part of my role as chair, I've been meeting the major developers to, you know, iron out problems they've had in the past, get them to do pre-apps, and so far, so good. Councillor Billings.
Chair, recognising that this is a public meeting and recognising that this is the opportunity now to describe to those that might view this on a YouTube at a later date, I was wondering whether Mr Blackwell could set out about how, as pre-apps have become more and more routine in the expectation from the council, how the time period for providing comments is gradually reducing and how that's ultimately speeding the application go through the system. I think it would be really helpful if you could remind this committee and hopefully anyone to have the opportunity to view this meeting at a later date, please.
I think the biggest thing we've done is we've launched fairly recently our your Shaping Your Future application inquiry, which is a one meeting, one follow-up email, and that ability to get in quickly and early and swiftly within a week or two, no consultation, you get to see an officer, whether it's for an extension to your house or right the way through to a large scale similar to this. Shape that future application, be involved as officers in that collaborative approach, pick out some of the key constraints, be involved in almost like a co-design. So you get it right first time, right at that first stage, and that sets off that sequence all the way through to us talking today and presenting something to you that we've all bought into and you know, had some creative involvement in as well. So yeah, we've got a pathway to a positive decision. We're seeing a lot more applications come through the pre-app process, and we're seeing less applications refused. So I'd fully endorse using it and working with us. Thank you.
Well, as we said, this report is for noting, so there's no decision is required. So thank you very much, committee. Thank you very much, officers. Thank you for the public and the speakers earlier on. And I call this meeting to an end. Thank you.